Hello there! Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I do hope you're doing great. I'm doing fabulous, thank you very much. And I'm so glad you've joined me for part 2 of our story tonight. And it is such a romantic story. I mean, imagine you're going to a bar, you're in your 70s, and somebody turns around to you that you meet in this bar, a handsome stranger, who in this case is Jesse, who's a rancher, who lives in Wyoming, and he has a ranch where he keeps steers. And he proposes to this woman who comes all the way from England, has never lived in America a day in her life, and he proposes to her. And is she about to accept his proposal? We're about to find out. But before we continue, I just wanted to say, if you probably heard at the end of the last program, a little dog getting terribly excited. It's happened more than once. Unfortunately, my dog does know when I say, until now, next time, goodbye and good night, and he gets terribly excited because it means that at the end of the recording, he's going to get lots of attention. So he knows what those words mean. So, just in case you're wondering what that is. So let's continue with part 2 of our story, but don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's continue with our story, shall we? Jessie's resolute decisiveness thrilled Missy. She'd never met anyone like Jesse Farmington before in her life. She'd always been drawn to cowboys from when she was a little girl, watching those Western movies on television, where she clandestinely rather fancied herself as the wife of a handsomely rugged cowboy. In her wild, far-flung, wistful fantasies, of course. But not even for a second did she ever think that such fanciful daydreaming that she had engaged in from her past would one day become fully realized. And yet now, in this Wyoming bar, in a matter of minutes, she had come a hair's breadth away from becoming a rancher's wife, and she had a prognostic feeling that Jesse Farmington would not disappoint. There was unquestionably a spark between Jesse and herself, but would it actually work? Her staying in America and settling down on a ranch like this with a rancher? I mean, stranger things had happened, and for some reason she decided she didn't have anything to lose. After her husband Michael had died, life had become incredibly lonely for her back in England. There were days she would retire to bed feeling as if she was adrift on the ocean, waiting for a ship to come and rescue her from her sorry, sequestered life. She did feel as if she was lost at sea, estranged from the life that she had known and loved. There were times, even in social situations, around a lot of people, where she engaged with friends, that she felt loneliest of all in their company, returning home to an empty house, to a cold bed, that she felt even more aware she had no one with her to share her life with. She had been very blessed and privileged to enjoy a good life in England, but had never been tempted to do something outrageously off the cuff and daredevil that involved a great deal of risk, and marrying a perfect stranger was like playing a wild card, and it appealed to her in ways that she could not explain. "Let's do it," said Missy, taking the rancher's hand and giving it a tight squeeze. He lifted her hand to his mouth and kissed it, holding her gaze, his lips twitching with amusement. "Missy Farmington," he said, already finishing her name with his surname, "you make me a very happy man indeed. And to think that I thought it was going to be a routinely mediocre day at the bar. How wrong I was about that. I cannot believe that you've accepted my proposal." "Well, I aim to please," said Missy, giving Jessie a cheeky wink. "Oh, my goodness, this is amazing," said Chancer, standing behind the bar ebulliently, looking as pleased as Punch. "To think I thought this was going to be a regular day at work. Wait until I tell my mother about this. She's the perennial romantic, she is. You should see our bookcases at home, bursting at the seams with romantic novels. But this love story blows all the ones she reads right out of the window. You can't make this stuff up, can you? Wait until I tell her about this. She'll be having kittens, but in a good way, of course. I'm going to give you both some champagne on the house. You deserve this. But I won't be shouting your good news out to the patrons, Jessie. I know that you're very private,
and you don't like people knowing your own business, so I'll keep this to myself." "I appreciate that very much, Chancer," said Jessie. "You're a good lad, you are. Some champagne would be lovely for this cause for a celebration indeed, and I'd like you to join us on that, Chancer, since you're privy to our exciting news. But I'll be paying for the champagne, and I want the finest French champagne that you have in the bar, because we need to celebrate."
2 weeks later, there was a long, uncomfortable, awkward pause at the end of the phone, and finally Missy's 54-year-old son Andrew spoke.
"You are kidding me, Mum."
"You did what?" "You heard me, son. I saw the sights. I visited San Francisco. Lovely city it is, too. Fascinating. I visited Los Angeles and New York. And I went to visit my friend in Wyoming. Sadly, she died. But I got married." She giggled like a teenager. "Me and Jessie Farmington tied the knot together in Las Vegas. We married at a place called the Chapel of Flowers. We stayed at the Bellagio. Oh, what an incredible place it was. Stunningly beautiful, so luxurious. We had such a wonderful, romantic time."
"Mum, you are 70 years old. Is this some kind of a warped, sick joke? Because if it is, I fail to find it remotely amusing. I thought you went to America to see the sights and to look up that friend of yours. Certainly not to get bloody married. You're not a whimsically naive teenager, for God's sake."
"Sweetheart, please mind your bad language, will you? You're speaking to your mother. You know better than to speak like that. If you must know, I met a stranger in a bar. We decided to tie the knot. I sat down to enjoy a rum and coke, and he asked me to marry him. And you know what? I thought to myself, why not? What have I got to lose? Besides, I rather fancied myself as a rancher's wife, and he's the quintessential cowboy, terribly handsome. I couldn't resist accepting his proposal." She giggled again.
"Mum, are you delusional or something? Who does that? Are you insane? You don't even know this man."
"But don't you see, sweetheart? I'm getting to know him. He is a wonderful man, quite the charmer, such an incredible gentleman. We're both falling for each other hard, you know. I think I love him. I really do. I know it's early days, but we both feel the same way about each other. It was serendipitous, like we've known each other all our lives."
"Mum, what language are you speaking? It's clearly not English. How long have you known him for?"
"Well, sweetheart, it's only been about 2 weeks. As I was telling you, he's a rancher. I moved on to his ranch 2 weeks ago, and then into his bedroom a week ago. We flew to Vegas to get married, and I've never been happier. He's a wonderful man, son, as I keep telling you. He's got a lovely American drawl. He's handsome, he's a cowboy, and he's all man."
"Mum, you're talking to your son here. You're making me physically cringe with such descriptions. They're far too graphic for my liking. You're talking like a silly, fanciful teenager, with hormones raging all over the place like the firecrackers on the 4th of July. But you're behaving like one too. For your information, I don't want to know the intimate details of your love life. I've got to eat, and my food isn't going to digest well, thinking of you shacked up with someone like this. You barely know the man, Mum. You're normally so sensibly prudent, so reliable. You play things safe in life. Why would you marry a random stranger like this? You're a 71-year-old woman, Mum. 70 going on 71. Hasn't your life experience taught you anything about being cautious and careful when you make life-changing decisions like this?
It's taught me, son, that sometimes it's worth taking a risk. I've done things safe all my life, and it's made my life rather dull and boring, if you must know. It's time for a change, and it's never too late for one.
Mum, this isn't like throwing a gamble on the horses. This is your life we're talking about. Whereabouts is this ranch of his?
His name is Jesse, son. The ranch is in Wyoming. A beautiful ranch it is too. Ponds, trees, creeks, mountainous valleys, lots of trees, vast open spaces. You name it. It's really spectacular. Very peaceful out here. And Jesse, as I keep telling you, is a lovely man. You would really like him. I know you would. I think if you met him, you would approve.
Mum, Wyoming is in the sticks. Even I know that, despite the fact I've only been to New York and Los Angeles. But I know enough. As far as I know, it's in the middle of nowhere. And I'm sorry, but you don't know this man. You can't know him in 2 weeks. I can't believe you've done something so impulsively like this. What were you thinking?
But I feel like I've known Jesse for a lifetime, son. Isn't that enough? And I do believe I'm falling for him hard. There was once again a long, awkward pause at the end of the phone.
Mum, this is crazy. Have you thought about what you've done? What about me and Andrea? We are your children. Don't you care at all about us? Then there's your grandchildren. You've abandoned us all, living at the other end of the world like this. It's an incredibly selfish and self-centered thing to do. I'm sorry, but it is. And I'm going to say it, even if it's a kick in the guts for you to hear. Someone needs to knock some sense into you.
Sweetheart, I love you and your sister Andrea very much. And my grandchildren, of course, very dearly. But my grandchildren are no longer kids. They've grown up themselves. They have their own busy lives to lead. I see them less than I see you and Andrea. I'm not complaining, of course. I appreciate that you've all got incredibly busy lives and that you're very preoccupied. Even when I lived in Derbyshire, I was incredibly lucky if I got to see you once a year. It's been terribly lonely for me without your father around. I've missed the bones of him. You know, and now that my dog is also passed away, it really hurts being on my own. He made your father's death more bearable. But Kibble's gone now. The cottage I've been renting has felt like a morgue. Very depressing it's been. You have your busy lives to lead, and I have mine. And I've met someone that I really care about a great deal. Are you not happy for me? Doesn't your old mum deserve some happiness in the winter of her life? You and the grandkids are welcome to visit us in Wyoming. The ranch is huge. There's a lot of space for the all of you. It's a wonderful excuse to come out here on holiday, and it would be lovely to have you here to stay.
Happy? Of course I'm not happy, Mum. You've made a catastrophic mistake, and right now I am so bitterly disappointed in you. I cannot speak to you. I feel grievously let down by you. How could you do this to us? You're now on the other side of the world. It's like you've abandoned us. I certainly don't want to visit some dump in the middle of nowhere. Me and the wife, we like to go to civilized places. And if we go to America, it will be to places like San Francisco, Boston and New York. Not a tiny, remote, rural American town in the sticks. That's about as interesting as watching paint dry. You'll be glad to know Andrea's here. She's with me right now. She's popped over for a visit. She wants to speak to you. I hope she'll talk some sense into you. You need to annul this preposterous marriage of yours. Get a quickie divorce and come back home.
Mum! It's Andrea speaking. Oh, my word! I can't believe it. Is it true? This is amazing. You've met someone in America. Oh, I'm so thrilled for you. Tell me all about him. Where did you meet him? I met him in a bar in Wyoming, wouldn't you believe? He's a rancher, a true American cowboy, handsome and charming, with a very pleasing southern drawl. He saw me in the bar and proposed to me 2 minutes later, I believe it was. You've got to be kidding me!
You see a handsome cowboy in a bar, and 2 minutes later he proposes to you, and you accept? Is this for real, or is this a joke?"
"It's for real," said Missy, beginning to giggle.
"I mean, there was a spark between us from the very beginning, of course. I mean, you don't ask a stranger you're not attracted to marry you. So there was an attraction between us. I thought he was terribly handsome. He thought I was lovely. And you know what? I thought, what the hell? Why not blow all caution to the wind and do something wildly outrageous for a change? And if it doesn't work, I could return to England, glad that I was not left wondering if refusing Jessie had been a mistake. I love it here on the ranch with him. Jessie is an incredible man with such a generously warm heart and a fabulous sense of humour. He's always making me laugh, and I've never been happier. For the first time in a long time, it feels so good to be alive. But your brother is making me feel dreadfully guilty about what I've done. But I have to say, sweetheart, I don't regret my decision at all, not even a tiny bit. It feels right, what I've done. Ma'am, don't apologise to me. This is the best news ever, and don't listen to Andrew. He hasn't got a romantic bone in his body. I'm sorry he's not happy for you, but, Mum, I am. When Dad died, I worried sick about you being on your own like that. I'm so glad you've met someone, Mum. I can't wait to have an excuse to come over to America to see you there in Wyoming, on a ranch of all things. I can imagine you would love it there, because you've always adored nature and love animals. Besides, you're an amazing cook and love pottering around the kitchen like a domestic goddess. It sounds like you found for yourself a keeper, and I think you were made to be a rancher's wife, because at heart you were never really a city girl, were you? No, I wasn't. When Missy put down the telephone, Jessie folded his arms lovingly around his wife, kissing her gently on her cheek. Missy had put the phone on speaker so Jessie could hear her conversation with her children. She wanted no secrets from him, and Jessie appreciated her open heart. He gave her a wink and made her smile. "I can tell there were mixed emotions there, especially with your son Andrew, about us getting together. But sons are very protective towards their mothers, so you can't blame him for reacting like that. Your daughter seems genuinely pleased for the both of us, and that's a promising start. You can never, of course, predict how your own children are going to react to news like this. But don't be too hard on Andrew. You are now living considerably further away from him, and it's not easy for him to digest. There was always a chance that he was bound to react adversely like this. But given time, I'm sure he'll come around to the news." "Well, I suppose I didn't expect him to react any other way. You could tell he was absolutely furious with me. But my daughter surprised me. She's always been a romantic, but she was genuinely thrilled for me. But my son thinks I'm as mad as a hatter to impulsively marry a stranger like this." "Correction," said Jessie. "I was a stranger 2 weeks ago, but I'm not any more. You've made me a very happy man, Missy Farmington. I told you I knew a good thing when I saw it. The ranch has blossomed, come to life with you around. The dogs love you, so does George the cat, and he's very particular about who he likes. A discerning character he is." "I still can't get over your boldness," said Missy, giggling. "You brazenly asking me to outright marry you like that. And I can't believe I actually said yes. But you know what, Jessie Farmington? Marrying you was the very best decision of my life, if the last 2 weeks are anything to go by. Well, when you came into the bar and ordered your rum and coke, and I heard you say you were passing through, I couldn't possibly let you go, could I? It seemed asking you to marry me was a sure way of keeping you here." "You are a very naughty man, Jessie, but I wouldn't have you any other way. But I will remind you, We've still got one more storm we need to weather. And that's your adult children. The question is, how are they going to react to me when they visit us next weekend? I'm awfully nervous about it, I have to tell you. I'm not exactly sure how they're going to react, Jessie admitted. I think my son Wagner ain't going to take the news terribly well. And as for my daughter Kathy, well, I'm not sure how she's going to take it. It could go both ways. But do you know what, Missy? These are our lives, and the choices we make have nothing to do with our children. If they don't like the decisions we make, well, that's their problem, not ours. Half the time my son Wagner used to date the most unsuitable woman at one point, but never once did I put my butt into his business, as I let him make his own life choices, his own monumental mistakes. You cannot control your grown-up kids, any more than they can control us.
Even so, said Missy, looking concerned, I would like your kids to like me. Have you told them anything about me, or are you still keeping stum?
No, I haven't told them a thing about you. I invited them to lunch next weekend. Told them I had something to tell them, and someone I wanted them to meet. I'm not sure if they suspect anything.
Well, you're saying that you want them to meet someone. Might raise questions with them. You don't think you should warn them first about me, do you? My presence might come as a shock to them. They might think you've replaced their mother, and that can be very hurtful for children, you know. It doesn't matter what age they are.
I think it's best not to reveal too much to them now. They need to meet you before they jump to wild conclusions. If they meet you, they might understand why I popped the question to you so quickly. And if they don't, well, it's tough, isn't it? They know I love their mother very much, but they also know how desperately lonely I've been without her. I can only hope they will be happy for me. And if they're not, that's their problem.
I'm not sure they'll understand, Jessie, said Missy. Children, as I keep saying to you, it doesn't matter what age they are. They're always your children, and they have a tendency to be rather difficult and capriciously belligerent at times. I'm lucky Andrea is so agreeable about all this. But I know Andrew thinks I've lost my mind. It's going to take a lot to persuade him that I've made a good choice in marrying you. But hopefully we'll get there in the end. 1 week later, Missy woke up early on a Saturday morning, after a restless, rather uncomfortable night's sleep. Even though the temperatures in the bedroom were pretty close to perfect, thanks to a very good air conditioning system, she was naturally rather nervous about the luncheon she was hosting for Jessie's adult children and his grandkids later that morning. Wagner's children were in their early 20s, but thankfully they would not be attending the lunch that day. Jessie's daughter Kathy, on the other hand, and her children would be coming. Her kids were between the ages of 5 and 7. She was coming to lunch without her husband, as he was working. Missy was worried about how Jessie's adult children would react to her once Jessie introduced her to them. What if they didn't like her? I mean, they might consider her an outsider. Jessie's side of the bed felt cold when Missy reached out to touch it, which meant he'd been out of bed for quite some time. He fastidiously woke up before the dawn broke to dutifully attend to the horses and steers on his ranch, which he ran so seamlessly smoothly, probably better than someone half his age. He was strong, fit, and patiently long-suffering, as any man was in his 30s. Missy had got used to his side of the bed being empty, but at night when they cuddled up to each other close, it was so good to have his reassuring strong arms around her body, cocooning her from the lonely life she had endured for far too long. It had been amazing to find how well suited that she and Jessie were from the very beginning, and it felt as if they'd never been apart. But she could not explain that to her son Andrew, who had rigidly stuffy opinions about how the world worked and what you did and did not do. If she told him exactly how she felt, he would likely take it the wrong way and claimed that she had obviously not really loved their father enough, if she dared to feel so tenderly towards another man. Jessie was practically finishing her sentences, and as irrational as it sounded, she felt as if she'd always belonged on this ranch, with the steers and the horses and the dogs. One of Jessie's golden retrievers, Mr. Spicer, had adopted Missy as his new best friend, while the two Labrador mixes, Cloud and Winger, were completely devoted to Jessie, and where he went, so did they. But all three dogs were lightly out with him this morning, following him around dutifully, embracing the fresh air with their usual rambunctious ebullience, as these dogs seemed to have forgotten that they were no longer puppies. Missy smiled contentedly to herself when she felt the familiar lump at the end of the bed, and knew it was George, the 8-year-old ginger tabby, that Jessie claimed had presumptuously parked himself on the front doorstep one day, and pompously invited himself to move in. And that had been that.
It was like he said, "Well, aren't you going to make way for me? Aren't you going to let me in? Or do I have to sit out here all day and wait?" Jessie had told her. And when he moved in, he thought he owned the place and owned us. And nothing has changed in that regard, let me tell you. Even the dogs look up to good old George, as if he calls all the shots around here. And believe me, he does.
George was now blissfully curled up at the bottom of the bed, with his legs happily outstretched. Missy reached out to stroke him lovingly, and he began to purr like a miniature steam engine.
"You're a lovely cat, George, aren't you?"
she told him, scratching the area under his chin, which he loved.
"Normally I enjoy being lazy with you," she told the cat, "and I would gladly sleep in with you. But I'm very nervous this morning, I'm afraid. I'm going to have to take a walk on the ranch to calm down my angst. Today's the day, George, when I meet Jessie's family, and I'm afraid I'm not taking it too well. As you can see, I'm shaking in my boots."
George looked up at her with a rather you than me type of look on his face, watching Missy with wide yellow eyes, as she sashayed over to the walk-in closet to retrieve a pair of trousers and a sweater. Missy had always fancied walking through the grove of trees that fringed a large silvery pond on the right-hand side of the ranch. But with the soaring temperatures that they had been experiencing of late, Jessie had wisely warned her that if she wanted to take a comfortable walk on the ranch, it was better to get up early in the morning, and Missy had not conquered the masterful art of early rising until now. It was the unsettling thoughts of meeting Jessie's adult children that had thrown her out of bed, like being flung out of your car seat into the windscreen during a collision. It was a daunting feeling thinking about meeting Jessie's grown-up children. She dreaded seeing how they might react to her. The previous day she'd been making homemade ice creams, potato salads, and all kinds of delicious sumptuous treats for Jessie's family to enjoy. But now in a few hours they would be here. She could not contain her anxiety. Jessie had been trying to reassure her that everything would be fine, but she was not sure that it would be. If her son Andrew's reaction was anything to go by, she had very low expectations about how the day would finally pan out. In order to get to the woodgrove on Jessie's ranch, Missy would have to walk across a couple of open meadows, and on a hot summer scorching day, that walk could be punishingly cruel, which was why early rising was not half such a bad idea. Jessie was used to the dry, hot temperatures of a Wyoming summer, but for her, frolicking around outdoors in the heat wave was something she would do well to avoid. She walked over to the curtain and pulled it back across the rails, to peer outside at the sprawling countryside that stretched out before her like an all-encompassing yawn. In the distance she could see the signature of the mountains, as they seized the sky with their powerful assertive dominance, their voluptuous hilly contours clouded in early morning mist, while the morning sky was stained in gasps of orange and gold that announced that the sun was rising, as soft injections of pretty morning light bathed the countryside in a shimmering glaze. Even though the grass was so yellow and rather tired-looking, Under the subdued light of the early morning, it looked rather fetching in this arboreal paradise that Jessie told her was over 6,000 feet above sea level, which was quite a staggering thought when you actually stopped to think about it. The clusters of trees fringed the bottom of the mountains in viridescent clusters. They cast their lofty reflections across the silvery pond, so the landscape was mirrored back at her like a world within a world. Missy felt as if the day was reaching out to her and surreptitiously coaxing her to explore the countryside, and something inside her felt the need to respond to its call, like an itch that she badly needed to scratch. "Don't worry," Missy told the cat. "I'm keeping the curtains closed for you so as not to disturb your restful slumber." Whether the cat was grateful or not for such loving considerations, she did not know. But George remained stoically curled up on the bed, looking ever so slightly disappointed to be deserted by his sleeping companion, whom he'd grown quite fond of over the last 2 weeks, as Missy knew how to give a cat the very best kind of scratches. Missy walked from her bedroom, down the long passageway to the kitchen, and then exited through the back door, but she left a note on the chalkboard that hung over the wall for reminders, such as groceries or things that needed doing. It probably wasn't necessary to leave Jessie a note, but she did so anyway, because it was the polite thing to do. "Gone for a walk in the grove, took your advice and got up early. I will be back very soon," she wrote. As Missy opened the door of the kitchen, which was always left unlocked during the day, the cool gasps of morning air were soothing and refreshing. She appreciated how spectacularly beautiful it was to be up this early in the morning, and wished she did this more often. She could see the distant figure of Jessie on horseback, galloping alongside a large herd of steers, with 3 dogs at his side. But she didn't wave at him, for he would not have seen her. But she smiled to herself because Jessie was without doubt the quintessential cowboy, who was now her husband, and this revelation she was still getting used to. Missy grazed the rocky ground beneath her walking boots that Jessie had kindly bought for her. She ambled through 2 sprawling fields, towards the twisted, gnarled-looking bark pine trees that had been recklessly abused by the vast swings in the Wyoming weather, from bone-dry summers, hurricane-force winds, to the cruel lashes of snow and ice that the winter months harvested. Ostensibly these 60-foot monster trees had been unkindly assaulted by hard batterings from the unscrupulous elements that knew no mercy, so consequently were a little twisted in their shapes, but Missy found them sculpturally beautiful. Some of them reminded her of old men leaning over from a great height to examine their toes. The grove invited a mix of quaking aspens, cottonwoods, mountain junipers, Douglas firs, green ashes, ponderosa pines, and there was a vast collection of bur oaks in the grove that Jessie claimed were close to being 300 years old, and some of them were absolutely magnificent to behold. Jessie had assured Missy that the acorns they offered provided a high-calorie diet for squirrels, deer, rabbits, and turkeys alike. As Missy entered the trees, the grove was cool and quite dark, as only whispers of sneaky light mischievously peeked through the boughs. The forest floor was rocky and tumultuous, with pitted crevices and dips, but it was a lot more richer in quality than the ground in the meadow, which had a low nutrient density. But with fallen leaves and the woodland oasis, Missy suspected the woodgrove was much more fertile. She ambled through rugged-looking briars and burrs, low-lying shrubs, patches of grass, and flowery shrubs. The forest was resplendently furnished, with occasional fallen logs, some covered in moss and lichen, and then there were pronounced tree roots that bludgeoned their way through the dry soil unapologetically. Missy enjoyed her invigorating walk. Soon she forgot about the tumultuous challenges that the day presented, as she drank in the syrupy beauty of the morning. She could hear the birds tweeting high up in the branches of the trees, and laughed out loud when she scared the bejesus out of some wild turkey, who were not remotely amused by her unwelcome presence, and made quite a squawking commotion as they hurriedly scuttled away as fast as they possibly could. Suffice to say, a couple of those turkeys were so big, Missy could almost imagine how great they would be for Thanksgiving dinner, served with roast potatoes, vegetables and gravy. It was after she'd been walking for quite a while. She sensed she was not alone. The first thing that came to her mind was that Jessie had come to look for her in the woods and decided to involuntarily join her for a walk, but then the dogs would have bounded through the trees first to greet her, long before Jessie, but there was no sign of him anywhere. But why did she feel so certain that she was not alone? She could perceive that she was being watched, and even drove her gaze right up into the branches of the trees to see if she could see something or someone hiding in plain sight, but nothing was there. The profound feeling that she was not alone did not abate. There was a slight morning breeze blowing, and a few leaves rustling on the branches of the trees, along with the pretty trill of the bird song. But beyond that, it was ominously quiet, almost too quiet.
Silly me, she told herself. What am I like? No one is watching me. Honestly, I've never been in a wood grove before. Of course my imagination is playing tricks on me. That's what it's got to be.
As she walked forward down the trail, she could hear the popping of twigs, as if someone with a heavy, sizable footfall was creeping surreptitiously behind her. She abruptly turned around very swiftly, to look over her shoulders, to scrutinize the area between the trees. But still, no one was there.
"Hello! Hello!" she called out. "Is anybody there? Jessie? Is that you? Jessie? Is that you? Because if this is some kind of joke, I'm not laughing."
But once again, she was met by a pretentiously stony silence. But even so, she began to feel awfully silly, deciding that her nerves about the day that lay ahead of her had made her unusually skittish. She stopped dead in her tracks for a moment, when she heard the ominous footfall again. Someone was definitely following her. This nauseating revelation made her head spin. Her heart performed cartwheels in her chest, as prickles of fear trickled down her spine. Her heart began to move very fast. Her breathing became fast and furious. She needed to leave the grove right now. She needed to get out of here straight away. But she couldn't move. She felt distinctly uneasy and on edge, but it was like she had frozen to the spot, like a terrified mouse. Something coughed. She glanced up to see an 8 to 9 foot giant standing before her, covered in hair, with a human-looking face and overlong arms that were outstretched towards her, holding out her dark glasses for her to take from him, that had obviously slipped out of her fingers and must have landed on the ground. And this thing, whatever in the hell it was nonchalantly handing them over to her, as if she'd stumbled across him in a supermarket car park, and they were extending polite pleasantries together. Missy was wondering if she was seeing right. She couldn't be. Was her vision distorted? She had to be dreaming. That was it. She was still in bed with George at her feet, experiencing a weird, lucid, vivid nightmare of some kind. But it dawned on her that she was really seeing this thing, and she began to panic. This huge creature, with its bullet-shaped head, was the scariest thing she had ever beheld in her entire life. Indeed, it was so monumental in size, she felt as fragile as a china doll in its presence. As the creature stepped forward to hand her her glasses, Missy was so filled with abject terror that she found herself paling and becoming very light-headed. And then she completely blacked out. So there we are. That is the end of part 2. Part 3 is tomorrow night. I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.